this is Duke, one of the G.I. Joe Task Force, and this is your G.I. Joe read-along book. Every time you hear this chime, it means it's time to turn the page in your storybook. Now we are ready to begin. Open your book and we will start our adventure. And remember, when you hear the chime, turn the page. It's an exciting life when you're one of the G.I. Joe Task Force, but some of our special missions are even more exciting than others. It all began as a typical practical joke that Snowjob played on Zap. Gung-ho was taking us through some dangerous jungle maneuvers when Snowjob put a little cooking oil on a crucial vine, and Zap found himself laughing and falling into the river below. He wasn't really mad. He liked the joke, but he didn't expect to fall onto a chunk of floating ice. Why was there ice in the river in the middle of the jungle summer? As he climbed out of the freezing water, Zap asked the other G.I. Joes what they thought. Doc said it was certainly very unusual for the super cold temperatures in this part of the world, and Scarlet said that she was freezing all day. We were all beginning to take this cold very seriously. None of the jungle flowers were blooming. In fact, all of a sudden, it became so cold that we could actually see our breath. We wrapped up tight in our emergency blankets and got out of there quick. But as we returned to base, Breaker informed us that while we were freezing in the jungle, there were thousands in the desert being rained out of their homes, and that all over the world the weather and the temperatures were going crazy. On our huge monitor, we could see it all. In the big cities, it was 100 degrees in the shade one minute and 20 degrees below the next. Even in our automatically climate-controlled headquarters, Wild Bill was getting hot under the collar. Hawk and Doc came up with the theory that someone had invented a machine that could change the weather of the whole world. And who could or would do such a thing? Only Destro, working in cahoots with our old enemy, Cobra Commander. The strange snowstorms were killing the world's crops, and the lakes began to freeze over. Scarlet figured out that if there was such a weather control weapon being used on the Earth, it would have to be aimed at us from a base somewhere above our atmosphere. Ace took up the rocket jet for a quick peek around the world, but came back empty-handed, and if he hadn't done some tricky flying to avoid a heat-sensing missile, he wouldn't have returned at all. Whatever the weather controller was, it had to be even farther away, like a transmission from a satellite. According to Short Fuse, this was going to be an easy mission, why plucking a tiny satellite out of the sky was simpler than bobbing for apples. Torpedo rigged up a quick ground-to-air missile, but after the explosion, the weapon was still undamaged and in orbit. It began to get very warm even underground at the headquarters, and when the phone rang, Rock and Roll found that he was talking to the Cobra Commander himself. The Cobra Commander was demanding the G.I. Joe's complete surrender, or else Destro would use his weapon to roast some parts of the world and freeze others. Wild Bill said that he'd lasso the blamed thing out of the sky before he'd ever give up, and although Snake Eyes was as silent as ever, he looked angry. Breaker was trying to lock into and jam the satellite's tracking system, and Stalker was mad because there was nothing he could do. Zap and Grunt came up with an idea to actually make a giant fishnet to haul it out of orbit, and Torpedo suggested an all-out attack on Cobra headquarters right away. But Scarlet reminded him that the satellite might be controlled from elsewhere or be programmed to just go on forever. There was a lot of mumbling and scuffling about headquarters and a lot of frustrated fighters. Suddenly, the radio receiver exploded in a flash of sparks. Next, the TV monitors, and then even the stereo. We were being fired upon, and obviously with pinpoint accuracy, and probably from that very same satellite. Even with all our planes, missiles, and bombs, suddenly all of us G.I. Joes were sitting ducks. You should have seen all of us tough galoots scrambling around the floor to avoid getting hit. Everyone but Doc, that is. He was lost in thought and finally snapped his fingers and shouted that he had figured it all out. It was going to require a lot of hard work and immediate action. But hey, that's what the Joes are all about. It was 10 degrees below zero outside now, but we didn't know how long that would last. Snow Job skied into town and returned with short fuse and an enormous spool of electrical wire. We knew that Destro would never be expecting what we were about to do. Of course, just to make sure, Rock and Roll and Stalker created a diversion near Cobra Commander's Sierra Gordo home base while the work began. Around and around we marched. No, it wasn't an exercise. We were all marching around in circles with each G.I. Joe carrying a heavy length of the long copper wire that Snow Job had brought back with him. Carefully, the ropes of copper were being connected to the city's central power supply. The Joes had built the world's largest electromagnet. Like a lasso, the powerful magnetic forces were strong enough for the satellite to actually be pulled out of its orbit and towards the Earth, where it would disintegrate in the atmosphere and allow the Earth's weather to return to normal. The evil weather machine fell harmlessly into the Atlantic Ocean, and I'll bet that Cobra Commander and Destro 2 had some angry words to say about it. Hawk congratulated each of us personally, but I know Zap doesn't use ice cubes in his drinks anymore. Anyway, don't worry about the rain and snow nowadays. It's all normal weather, that's all. And you're welcome for a job well done. Another one, I might humbly add, by the G.I. Joes.